Hey everyone, Mr. Harvey here. Let's continue our lecture. We're on chapter 13, ladies and gentlemen, and we are talking about the Industrial Revolution. It's another windy day, so you might hear some wind in this lecture, ladies and gentlemen. So today I want to focus on a couple of different components of the Industrial Revolution, ladies and gentlemen. The first thing I want to kind of talk about is the labor force, and we're going to kind of talk about some of the different social classes and social structures of the Industrial Revolution, ladies and gentlemen. I want to talk about some of the reactions to the Industrial Revolution, ladies and gentlemen. And then I want to talk a little bit about how family life and families are going to be impacted by the Industrial Revolution. And then at the very end of this lecture, I kind of want to quickly talk about child labor. All right, so let's get into it. One of the most important things to understand about the early Industrial Revolution, ladies and gentlemen, of the 19th century is that the labor force really varied. All right, some workers are going to be really benefit and do really well with the Industrial Revolution, especially those workers who joined kind of those textile industries early that were really booming in Great Britain. They're going to be doing pretty well. Other members of the labor force, ladies and gentlemen, are going to be more subsistence workers. They're considered the laboring poor. They're going to be really just kind of scraping by, living day to day, week to week. And not necessarily in total poverty or whatnot, but they're not going to be having necessarily a stable wage or necessarily like even a stable job. Others within the labor force, ladies and gentlemen, of this working class that we're going to be talking about had awful working conditions, and the most terrible working conditions, ladies and gentlemen, were in the mines. Mining, as we know, is going to be vital to the Industrial Revolution, ladies and gentlemen, with iron, with coal. And working in the mines was very, very tough, and those were really tough conditions. And working conditions is something that I want you to highlight and pay attention to, ladies and gentlemen, in your notes, because this is going to be something that really influences some strong reactions from workers. That's going to lead to unionization. We're going to see this, be a really prime motivator for some of the ideology, socialism, communism, is working conditions. And that's going to be a big argument, and that's going to be actually, a big motivator for why we see some of the major reforms that we kind of talked about in Chapter 12 with Great Britain among the working class. So working conditions is something that's really important to workers, and in the early onset of the Industrial Revolution, these working conditions were not very good. Early on, ladies and gentlemen, in the 19th century, we're going to see a rise of industrial workers, and we're going to be talking about this working class. But during the first half of the 19th century, ladies and gentlemen, only textile work was really thoroughly mechanized and in the factory setting. We're going to be seeing other industries start to really blossom and really start to boom. But really only textile work, which makes sense because textile work was the first industry to be mechanized and industrialized. Only textile work was really thoroughly mechanized. Most workers in the city were still skilled artisans, but that's going to change. And the skilled artisans, ladies and gentlemen, were really fearful of the Industrial Revolution. I'm going to be talking about that a little bit on the next slide, because skilled artisans were really trying to protect their skills from automation, really trying to protect their guilds, really trying to protect against standardization, automation, like shoemakers, other clothes makers. They're very fearful of industrialization because this can put them out of work, as industrialization has the potential and will produce cheaper goods faster, and artisans are really going to be hit hard by the Industrial Revolution, which we were talking about, ladies and gentlemen. Okay, I also want to talk a little bit about wage labor. This is really important, and this is going to be a new type of economic system that emerges within the 19th century and industrialization. So we're going to see this wage labor force called the proletariats, and we're going to see a proletariatization of workers' labor. Now, I really want to, I highlighted and bolded this term, proletariat, because this is going to be a really important term for us to understand, especially as we get into the really important ideologies of socialism and communism that are going to be rising because of industrialization and capitalism. Proletariat really is just referring to, ladies and gentlemen, workers. Okay, so if you see that word proletariatization, it's referring to workers. All right. Another word that's going to be really important for us, ladies and gentlemen, is bourgeoisie. That's really, and that word, ladies and gentlemen, is really referring to more affluent, wealthy, upper class, upper middle class, individuals. Okay, so just some important context with those words. But what we're going to be seeing, ladies and gentlemen, with workers is that their labor is going to be a really important commodity within industry, within this mechanized, new labor marketplace. And we're going to kind of see this trade-off, ladies and gentlemen, between the worker and like the factory owner or like the manager, right? You have a factory owner who's going to supply the machines, the materials, while the workers are going to contribute their labor for a wage. And obviously the workers are going to contribute their labor to make a product. So the factory owner is going to supply the materials, pay the worker. The worker is then going to, use their labor, use their skills to produce a final good for the factory owner to sell so he can make a profit. And, obviously he's going to cut a small percentage of that profit to give a wage to the worker. All right. Now, laborers, workers, ladies and gentlemen, if they're going to work for a factory owner, they're going to be, subjected to rules, punishments, scoldings. They can't be late. They can't show up, inebriated, right? They can't show up intoxicated. They have to, if they, they have to, obviously do a good job. There's going to be, there's a certain level of performance that they're and expectations that they're going to be subjected to. So it's really important, ladies and gentlemen, to understand that there's going to be, the factory owner is going to, subject rules on the laborers, punishments on the laborer, if he's not, working up to that factory owner's standards. All right. Now, something really important to mention, I mentioned this before, is artisans. Okay, now artisans are going to enter this wage labor force very slowly, and they're actually going to benefit initially. This is important, so I want you to highlight this in your notes. Initially, the urban artisans are going to benefit from industrialization in their urban areas. Okay, for example, metal workers. Okay, they're going to be really important in building equipment, factory machines, helping design these machines. So artisans using their skills with metalwork and whatnot are going to really, some of them are going to benefit big time from industrialization. However, as we start to see mechanization, more things mechanized, we're going to see artisans really get pushed out of being a major player within the economy. We're going to see the prices of raw materials start to go down due to larger supplies and more demand. It's really important to understand, ladies and gentlemen, that as we see more mechanization and more industrialization, that urban artisans are going to be, threatened with, in this organization of production and all this mechanization and industrialization. And we're going to see really this guild system. And I've kind of talked about this previously, ladies and gentlemen. This is an association of merchants or craftsmen that offered, protection to its members and set rules for their works and products, and only allowed a certain number of blacksmiths or carpenters or different types of workers into the city. Well, this system is really going to be threatened by the free market enterprise of competition with capitalism and with the mechanization and industrialization of different industries. For example, textiles, right? If you have an artisan who specializes in making clothes, they're going to be threatened with the textile industry mechanizing, because the textile industry is able to produce clothes faster and with machines, and so they're going to be cheaper. And so people are going to buy. It's almost the way I want you to think about it is think about like a pair of shoes, right? If you get a pair of like Vans, or if you get a pair of Converse, there's a certain amount of money. But if you get like shoes that are handmade by a certain artisan, wow, they're really expensive, right? That just kind of illustrates the difference. Artisans are really threatened in their industry, in their specific industries, with mechanization, and the guild system is going to be really threatened by this. Okay, as capitalism calls for competition. All right, not necessarily cooperation, not necessarily protect a certain protection of keeping people in business. It's survival of the fittest, really, within capitalism. So this guild system is going to start to really go down, and we're going to see 19th century legislation be unfavorable towards guilds. Okay, they believe they were raising the prices of labor and products, ladies and gentlemen, and so we're going to see legislation really start to strike down guilds. And again, what this is doing, ladies and gentlemen, is this is injecting capitalism, competition, not protecting these workers from any competition. It's injecting competition in there, so prices go down and the quality of goods goes up. All right. And artisans are also going to experience competition from larger businesses developing and cheaper goods, like I mentioned. Okay, and we're also going to see this notion of confection. Okay, these are goods such as shoes that are produced in standard sizes rather than specifically for one customer. And like I used that example before, right? Like if you go to an artisan who hand makes a shoe designed for your foot, wow, that's gonna be really really expensive. Versus if you go to an outlet, right, like a Vans outlet, a Converse outlet, you can get like a certain size, like a 10, 10 and a half. Women's, children's sizes, men's sizes. Okay, and that's going to really challenge artisans, and because artisans simply won't be able to compete with those cheap prices and the efficiency and how quickly those goods are being produced. And what confection is going to lead to, ladies and gentlemen, is this division of labor with an artisan. They're going to start producing, more of the pieces of a final product as opposed to just, producing a final product. And we're also going to see, lower wages, ladies and gentlemen. And so, the artisans are going to become wage laborers whose skills are going to be, bought and sold. And so, for example, a good example can be like a certain type of mechanic, right? A mechanic who specializes on transmissions. Now, if you take a car with a whole bunch of problems into this certain mechanic, that mechanic, and this is a really example for this time, but I'm talking about a little bit later, in maybe even our current day today. If you were going to a transmission mechanics, well, they specialize in that certain. They specialize in that certain trade within car repair, right? Transmission repair or whatnot. If you go to a car tire store, right? They specialize in a certain piece of the car, which is tires. Okay, maybe tire repair, tire sales. Okay, so that's kind of what I'm kind of talking about, is this division of labor. You're going to start to see less artisans produce a final product, and they're producing more of like certain pieces of a final product. And that's kind of, I was trying to connect that with cars today. If that wasn't a good example, let me know in the comments, and I can talk more. I can give a better example in another lecture. Okay, let's continue. All right, so I also mentioned, ladies and gentlemen, the bourgeoisie. This is a really important social class that we're going to be seeing really rise during the 19th century, ladies and gentlemen. Okay, and we're going to see factory owners start to merge into the bourgeoisie. Again, affluent, upper class, upper middle class. And there's going to be really two levels of the bourgeoisie, ladies and gentlemen. You have the upper bourgeoisie. These are going to be bankers, merchants, industrialists who are all about that free enterprise and high tariffs. And then we're going to see the lower bourgeoisie, which were also called the petite bourgeoisie, ladies and gentlemen, which were smaller industrialists, merchants, professionals who demanded government stability and security. And we're going to be talking more about this later. But the bourgeoisie, ladies and gentlemen, versus the proletariat. You have the bourgeoisie, more affluent, the proletariat, less affluent. We're going to see, especially when we get into socialism and communism, kind of this battle between the two groups. Okay, we're going to see certain ethnic and religious groups really prosper with capitalism. We're going to see the Quakers and Scots in England, Protestants and the Jewish community will, start to dominate certain industries such as banking in Catholic France. And so we're going to see, ladies and gentlemen, some serious movement, some serious social movement within the Industrial Revolution. Okay, and here's just a picture of some early machines, ladies and gentlemen, from the Industrial Revolution. Let's continue. All right, so let's talk about the proletariat wage earners, ladies and gentlemen. The factory worker is going to become a new group in society. And this is really important, ladies and gentlemen. I want you to take out a highlighter, a pen, all right, circle, star. All right, this is very important for us. We are starting to see the working class, okay, the working class. All right, the factory worker, this working class is going to become a new group in society. It's going to be the fastest growing social class in Europe, ladies and gentlemen, and they are going to become a dominant force, all right, politically, socially, very important, and economically. Now, during the first half of the 19th century, ladies and gentlemen, factory workers had terrible labor conditions due to a surplus of labor. Also, just, with industry starting out. Okay, so labor conditions were awful, ladies and gentlemen. And I talked about that, right? I mentioned the mines. Awful, 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 terrible conditions. Okay, hours in a factory could be as long as 14 hours. There was very few holidays. Conditions were unsafe, very low wages, especially for women and children. And so conditions were not good. And again, this is going to be these awful conditions are going to lead to some major reforms that we're going to be talking about, because the workers are either going to revolt or there's going to be some change, because these working conditions early on are not good. Okay, we're going to start to see poorhouses, ladies and gentlemen, emerge to provide work for those who are unemployed. And the conditions of these poorhouses, ladies and gentlemen, were intentionally awful to persuade workers to leave and go find work elsewhere. But we're going to start to see, ladies and gentlemen, this idea of like a social safety net, and how can we help the working class? And we're going to see reform, and we're going to see different ideologies emerge from that. Okay, let's talk about some of the long-term effects of the Industrial Revolution. A lot of historians believe that the long-term impact of the Industrial Revolution was more favorable than negative, and I kind of agree and disagree, and I'll give some reasons why. Some of the arguments that historians make is that the material prosperity in England and across Europe is going to increase due to the availability of cheaper, high-quality goods and increased consumption. That's going to lead to more jobs. So, a big argument that the positive impact of the Industrial Revolution is just more jobs. Increased wages that are going to be another reason. The wages will increase throughout the 19th century, and so that's something that historians point to as being positive within the Industrial Revolution. Workers are going to have a better diet, have more clothes. Okay, housing did not improve necessarily for the working people. So there's a little bit of a mixture within the Industrial Revolution, and something that I kind of want to add to this, ladies and gentlemen, that's a negative, is the environmental impact, okay, of the Industrial Revolution, and that's going to be something that I think historians now, especially with climate change, ladies and gentlemen, and some of the arguments concerning the environment with the Industrial Revolution, some of the implications of that. So just a point, just a couple of notes. But early on, a lot of historians believed that there was a lot of positives notions within the Industrial Revolution. Let's continue. All right, so let's talk about some of the reactions to the Industrial Revolution. Okay, one of the first and most influential reactions we're going to see is from Frederick Angle. He's going to write The Condition of the Working Class in England. He's going to be a future colleague of Karl Marx. We'll talk more about him with the Communist Manifesto, ladies and gentlemen. But he believed that the middle class really ruthlessly exploited the proletariats, and he's going to be a very influential figure to Karl Marx, and we're going to and to later socialists, which are what we're talking about. So just make a note of Frederick Angle, ladies and gentlemen. Very important individual for us. The Luddites are also an important reaction and group for us to understand. This is a violent group of the early 1800s. They blamed industrialism for taking and threatening their jobs. Beginning in the early 1800s, this group is going to attack factories in England, destroy new machines that they believed were putting them out of work. And this, ladies and gentlemen, it's important to understand that these sediments still exist today. We don't necessarily see groups going out and like blowing up factories and whatnot. But these fears and anxieties of new industries kind of taking over old industries is very much still alive today. A great example, ladies and gentlemen, is with Uber and Lyft and like some of these ride sharing apps, and how when they were starting to really come out, like how taxi drivers felt about that. Well, that was directly competing against taxis, and a lot of people, because Uber and Lyft was very convenient and fast, you could just use an app on your phone, and it was cheaper. That really was putting taxi drivers, the taxi kind of industry was really hurting, ladies and gentlemen. And so this is kind of the same notion, is that you had groups that were really fearful of industrialism kind of taking their jobs and threatening their jobs, and so they were very fearful. And during this time, we had these groups, these Luddites, attacking factories in order to protect their jobs. All right, the union movement, and this is going to be really important, ladies and gentlemen, because unions exist today. As a teacher, I'm part of a union. There's unions all around the world, and in the United States, you have firefighters unions, a nurses union, certain grocery outlets, like I think Safeway and Vons, like they have unions. And let's talk about this, ladies and gentlemen. Is you're going to start to see workers begin to organize to resist exploitation of the proletariat by business owners. And it's just a union. It's this notion of the workers kind of banding together to make decisions collectively to help them fight for hours, wages, just to organize in order to push back if they feel exploited by business owners. So that's the idea of a union. All right, and so really important to understand, ladies and gentlemen, that early on in the Industrial Revolution, there was the Combination Acts. We talked about that a little bit before in Chapter 12. But Parliament is going to prohibit labor organizations and unions. Remember, out of fear, from a sans culottes type of organization growing. And this is going to be repealed in 1824, ladies and gentlemen. And we're going to start to see some really important figures start to make kind of a movement towards unionization. And one of those figures, and we're going to talk about them a little bit later with socialism, so make sure you highlight this name, is Robert Owen. Okay, and this notion of the Grand National Consolidated Trades Union. Now, Robert Owen was a Scottish industrialist who pioneered industrial relations by combining different discipline with concern for the workers. So, and we'll talk more about Robert Owen a little bit later in this lecture. But Owen believed, that business owners could make money, okay, and make a profit, but at the same time, care for their workers and provide them housing and provide them, with a fair wage. And that if you, in this notion that if you help your workers more and care for them, that they'll be more motivated and have a more positive relationship with the business and the owner, and that will influence them and help them work even harder and be more efficiently. So that was kind of his ideas. Now, some of his efforts are going to fail to kind of create a complete workers' union. So an idea that Robert Owen had was to kind of in the UK kind of create this total workers' union of all workers, regardless of trade or business. So you had, whether it was like a carpenter, a blacksmith working in textiles, the mines, that all these workers were united with this giant workers' union. That's not really going to work. And so we're going to start to see British union efforts move in the direction of craft unions, which is where you see like the mining union, the textile union, the railroad union, right? Like more of like a certain craft, okay, a certain industry. He's also going to experiment with utopian cooperative and socialist communities, which we will be talking about. And like I said before, the craft unions are these unions of workers with a similar craft. Okay, and we're going to see craft unions. And craft unions are more of the trend that we have today in the United States. But we're going to see craft unions, start to become more apparent in Europe during this time. Let's continue. All right, we're also going to see, ladies and gentlemen, the Chartists. Okay, this is going to be the first large-scale European working-class political movement, ladies and gentlemen. And this was a program of political reform in Great Britain, and we had the London Working's Men's Association. In 1838, this group is going to issue the charter demanding 6 specific reforms. And there's like 6 points of this charter. Now, it's never going to be passed by Parliament, but what's important about the Chartists is they're really going to, some of their ideas are going to be really influential to some of the later reforms that we're going to be seeing in Great Britain. They're going to call for universal male suffrage, equal electoral districts. So like, the workers' district has just as much of a say as, another district. The abolition of property qualifications and the payment of salaries to members of the House of Commons, so you can have more representation within the House of Commons. And this is going to fail as a national movement. What's important with the Chartists is that some of their points are going to be, become law. And another point that's really important about the Chartists is that this was a grassroots movement, ladies and gentlemen. This was really a movement that started from the workers, so it was really bottom up as opposed to lawmakers or a smaller group of people having these ideas. This is really a movement that started with the workers. Okay, let's continue. All right, and here's kind of a picture showing a Chartist gathering. Let's continue. All right, So this is something that I really want to focus on, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to end our lecture in a couple minutes, but I want to talk about changes with families, okay, and kids. All right, there's going to be some major implications for families and children. Now, before the Industrial Revolution, ladies and gentlemen, the individual family was the chief unit of production and consumer. So typically, the family made stuff. Okay, a big change that we're going to see is the mechanization of weaving and the mechanization of textiles. That's going to start to bring men, the father, to the factory, as the father will be the chief operator of these early machines. Okay. However, and this is really important for us, so let's make sure we highlight this. The structure of the early factory is going to start to allow for family and fathers to preserve their traditional roles. So what I'm trying to say here, ladies and gentlemen, is that the early factory system is going to allow the entire family to kind of have their traditional family roles, traditional family norms within the workplace. So the family, early factory owners and supervisors are going to allow the father to employ his wife and children as his assistants and have them in the factory with them. That's going to change, though. Okay, so this is the early factories. Okay, late 1700s, early 1800s. Okay, and this is really important for family life. Parental training, discipline could be transferred from the home to the early factory. In some cases, whole families would move near the factory and just work there. Family members still had to face work discipline, and women and children still did less skilled work than the man. But this is really important to understand, ladies and gentlemen. The family unit was kept whole, was kept together. That we're going to see a big change that's going to start in the Industrial Revolution. Okay, so something that's going to happen, one of the earlier changes that we're going to be seeing, ladies and gentlemen, is when we start to see machines be upgraded. Newer and easier to use machines are going to lead to more employment of unmarried women and children in the factories as unskilled workers, as machines get simplified and easier to work. And these workers are going to be, really sought after, unmarried women and children, as they would typically accept lower wages and were less likely to form workers' organizations, unions, strike, or revolt. Okay, so women and children were less likely to do some of these things and would accept lower wages. All right. Now, another change that we're going to be seeing, ladies and gentlemen, as the wages for some skilled male laborers become really, really, they increase. Those wages increase enough that some of their children are going to be able to leave the factory and go to school. And the wives of these really skilled male workers are also going to be able to leave the factory, as they don't need, as the male in this family makes enough money for the wife to not have to work and for the child to not have to work. And what's important about this implication, ladies and gentlemen, is we're going to see many children and women are going to leave in the factory that were related to economically depressed weavers. And we're going to start to see, ladies and gentlemen, men now supervising women and children who do not belong to their families. So what's important about this, ladies and gentlemen, is we're seeing the family starting to get broken up within the factory system. Okay, you're starting to see unmarried women and children in the factories. Okay, really important. And you're starting to see for the skilled male laborers, their wives, their kids are not in the factory anymore. And so you're seeing men, supervise, work with, children, women that they don't necessarily know. All right, and so that family factory life is slowly starting to kind of get broken up, and you're starting to see the family unit get broken up economically, which is important for us. Let's continue. All right, just a picture of some of the early factories, and an important group that we're going to be talking about more in this chapter and more within the Industrial Revolution is unmarried single women. They're going to be very, very important. We're going to see a lot of changes for them with urbanization, with industrialization. Okay, let's talk more about changes in the working conditions. We're almost finished with this lecture, ladies and gentlemen. Just kind of hang in there. Factory work is going to mean more discipline, loss of personal freedom. Work is going to be much more impersonal. And we're going to see, ladies and gentlemen, the early cottage worker and a lot of workers initially reluctant to work in the factories for decent wages, because this was an environment that they were so different from. I spelled from wrong. From what they were used to, and so that's something really important, ladies and gentlemen. This is going to be, almost like an economic culture shock for a lot of people, and so these changes are going to be, really hard for some people to adapt to. But I want to talk about child labor, ladies and gentlemen. One of the biggest implications of the Industrial Revolution, ladies and gentlemen, is the exploitation of child labor. Now, there's a lot of causes for child labor within the Industrial Revolution, ladies and gentlemen. One, cheap labor, okay? Children can be hired for much cheaper wages than men and women, okay? More agricultural workers, ladies and gentlemen, are going to become weavers because it paid well, and there's going to be a large supply of abandoned children in parishes, orphanages, as we see increasing urbanization. So it's really important for us to understand, ladies and gentlemen, that there's going to be a huge supply of child labor, all right, of children, all right, and that's one of the things. If you have ever read Charles Dickens, Charles Dickens was a writer, and a lot of his themes go back to industrial Great Britain of the 1800s, and one of the stories that really talks about these abandoned children is Oliver Twist. So just a note on that, there's a lot of abandoned children that are going to be exploited by business owners. So their treatment, they're going to be treated awful. They're going to be treated like slaves. They're going to have long work hours. Their conditions are going to be terrible. They're going to work as chimney sweeps, shoemakers. It's really important to understand that child labor is not new. Children are going to be doing a lot of the same work that they did traditionally in the cottage industry, but the exploitation is going to be so rampant and so egregious that this issue of child labor is going to really come to light, especially within British society. Another thing that I want to talk about is some of the jobs that the kids did. Some of the jobs that they did was they would kind of get into the machines. They were really small, right? You have little kids, 5, 6, 7 years old, who are smaller, who can kind of get in and fix machines, and they're going to be doing really dangerous work, ladies and gentlemen, in fixing those machines. Okay, this is really important for us, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to see the Sadler Commission, ladies and gentlemen, in Great Britain, and this is a very important commission. Let's make sure we highlight and circle this. Ladies and gentlemen, it's going to be investigating the working conditions and help initiate legislation to improve conditions at the factories, especially for kids. And this is where we see the English Factory Act that I mentioned in Chapter 12 as part of those great reforms, Earl Grey, that Whig Parliament, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to see, ladies and gentlemen, the Sadler Commission start to help facilitate some of those major reforms that we saw that we're going to be seeing in Great Britain. The English Factory Act is big time, 1833. It's going to forbid employment of children under the age of 9, limit the work day to 9 hours for children 9 to 13. And there's also going to be an education requirement. The factories had to provide 2 hours of education, and and that's really going to start the process of nurturing children from the home to the classroom. 1847, Parliament's going to pass the 10-hour workday. The Mines Act is going to prohibit all boys and girls under the age of 10 from working underground. And these are some major important changes, ladies and gentlemen, within labor laws. And you need to know a couple of these. Know the Sadler Commission, and definitely know that English Factory Act. But a bigger change that we're seeing, ladies and gentlemen, is this notion that the European family is now a unit of consumption as opposed to, previously consumption and production, like I noted. The European families are going to be, mainly consumers now. Okay, consumerism. And we're going to be talking about this consumerism culture within capitalism and industrialization. It's a major part of how that system works. Okay, we're going to see families are now going to come to depend on wages from several sources as opposed to sharing work in the home or the factory. You might see children move far away as wages can be sent over large distances. Or children can stay at home longer as they can find a wage employment in the city where they are from. So we're going to see some really new, drastic economic systems emerge, especially with kids. Okay, let's stop here for today, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much, and we are going to continue the next lecture talking about women.